Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Gossips 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The tension inside the Forrester mansion felt thick enough to slice through, a pressure that had been building for months and now finally reached its boiling point as Rich Forrester walked through the doorway completely unaware that he was about to witness a moment that would change the balance of his entire family forever. And all at once the peaceful elegance of the space, those immaculate marble floors, the golden frames of the family portraits, the subtle scent of lemon polish, collapsed into chaos the moment he heard Brooke's trembled gasp echo across the foyer, the kind of sound that didn't belong to heated disagreements or misunderstandings but to genuine fear, a fear Ridge recognized instantly in the way it cracked her usually steady voice, and before he even had the chance to comprehend what had triggered it he saw Thomas, his son, the boy he once watched play with toy race cars and tiny sketch pads, standing over Brooke with a storm of rage swirling through his eyes, a fury Ridge had never seen burn so violently, a fury that clearly had been festering inside him for far longer than anyone realized. And it was only when Thomas's accusatory shout broke through the air that Ridge felt the world tilt in a way that made him question whether he had misjudged everything about the progress Thomas claimed to have made. Because Thomas wasn't just angry, he was shaking from it, trembling with a ferocity that made Brooke instinctively back away, hands raised in frightened surrender as she tried to reason with him the way you might try to soothe an unpredictable wildfire that refused to be contained. And the moment Ridge saw Thomas take another step toward her, too fast, too aggressively, his instincts snapped into action, sending him rushing between them just as Thomas lunged forward with words so sharp they felt like thrown knives. Words about betrayal and manipulation and the years he believed Brooke had spent destroying every piece of stability he ever tried to have in his life, and Ridge felt the punch of that accusation as though Thomas had hurled it at him personally, because no matter how rocky his history had been with Brooke, Thomas's narrative was a twisted version of their past, fueled by old wounds that never truly healed. But before Ridge could respond, before he could even form the thought of how to de-escalate this spiraling confrontation, Thomas shoved forward again, this time brushing past Ridge's arm in a movement that wasn't quite a strike but wasn't harmless either, and the suddenness of it sent Brooke stumbling backward, her hand hitting the edge of the console table as she steadied herself, and something inside Ridge snapped, not with anger but with fear that this moment was the one Thomas could never take back. And just as Ridge opened his mouth to shout for him to stop, they all heard another voice boom through the room, deep, unwavering, and thunderous in a way that froze every muscle in the space at once. And there stood Eric Forrester, the patriarch, the man whose authority had shaped generations of Forresters, marching toward them with a fury Ridge hadn't seen since he was a teenager caught lying about skipping school. But this time the fire wasn't for harmless adolescent mistakes, it was for his family being on the brink of collapse right in front of him. And as Eric's eyes locked on Thomas, the disappointment radiating off him was so profound it seemed to physically push Thomas backward. Because Eric wasn't just angry, he was heartbroken, devastated even, that his grandson who fought so hard to earn back trust, who claimed he had reformed, who swore he had let go of obsession and manipulation and emotional warfare, was now standing in his living room screaming at Brooke Logan like she was the root of all his suffering. And Eric's voice boomed again, louder this time, demanding Thomas step away from Brooke immediately, and Thomas's expression flickered with something, defiance? Shame? Desperation? But before he could decide what direction that emotion would lead him, Eric stepped forward like a force of nature, positioning himself protectively in front of Brooke in a gesture Ridge had rarely seen, and the sudden image of his father defending Brooke with such conviction only added to the weight crushing Ridge's chest, because in that moment everyone realized this wasn't a misunderstanding or an emotional outburst spiraling too far. This was a fracture years in the making, finally breaking open for everyone to see. And Thomas's breathing intensified as if he were fighting the entire room, his agitation electric and unpredictable, and Ridge felt the painful ache of fatherhood drowning in failure as he saw the man his son had become, brilliant, talented, deeply wounded, and dangerously volatile, and it all culminated into a storm that seemed impossible to stop. But Eric's voice remained firm as steel as he told Thomas that this behavior, this aggression, this inability to separate past resentments from present reality, was not only unacceptable, it was deeply destructive, not just to Brooke but to the entire family, and the word struck Thomas harder than any physical blow could have, his jaw tightening as his eyes darted between Ridge, Brooke, and Eric like he was searching for one single ally in the room yet finding none, because even Ridge, the father who always saw the best in his son, even when it wasn't there, couldn't defend what was unfolding right in front of him. And Ridge's voice finally broke through the tension as he called Thomas's name, not with anger but with raw desperation, the kind that begged a son to choose a better path, to take a breath, to step back before everything collapsed beyond repair. But Thomas wasn't listening, not fully, not clearly, because the pain and resentment swirling inside him had taken the wheel, steering him into accusations dripping with years of bitterness, claiming Brooke had poisoned Ridge against him, that she had manipulated every fragile chance Thomas ever had at redemption, and Brooke, trembling but steady enough to speak, tried to tell him that she had never been against him, that she had always wanted him to succeed, to heal, to be the father Douglas deserved. But Thomas cut her off with a sharp, vicious glare that made Ridge instinctively move closer, a silent barrier between them, and Eric's patience snapped entirely as he demanded Thomas look at what he was doing, look at who he was becoming. And when Thomas refused to step down, refused to soften, refused to pull back the fury radiating off him even an inch, Eric delivered the line that sucked all the air from the room, telling Thomas he needed to leave the house immediately before he destroyed any remaining trust the family still had in him. And the echo of those words, "Leave this house now," hung in the air like a sentence that couldn't be undone, leaving Thomas stunned, Ridge heartbroken, and Brooke visibly shaken as the reality of what had just happened settled into a heavy, suffocating silence. Eric is fired from Forrester Creations by the bold and the beautiful Ridge, and John McCook is fired from BNB? According to spoilers for the bold and the beautiful Ridge, Forrester, Torsten K. expels Eric Forrester from Forrester Creations on Thursday, December 4th. In order to relieve Ridge of some of the workload, Eric desired to return to the design team. Nevertheless, despite every effort to change Ridge's mind, he refused. Ridge Forrester leaves. Eric is reminded by Ridge that his last words nearly killed him. Ridge is not going to let Eric endanger himself once more. Ridge is in control, and he is content to take on the demands of his position. Even though Eric wasn't done talking, Ridge simply leaves after receiving a message. As he observes everyone going about their day, Eric is utterly devastated. Eric tells himself, "Out with the old, in with the new." Eric was reluctant to go. Eric still keeps his sketching pencil. But nobody is offering Eric a voice in the situation. Jennifer Garice's character Donna Logan isn't making any progress either. "He'll be a designer till his dying day," claims Donna. Eric Forrester gathers his belongings. Eric starts looking through his belongings in the front office as if he were prepared to pack them up and give up. But Eric might also be thinking of something else. "I'll be working right up until they drag me out of here," McCook stated to Soaps.com in 2024. "Every day that I have this work I secretly rejoice. It's creative, enjoyable, and I enjoy my coworkers. This employment and the work I'm fortunate enough to get to do are the next things I'm thankful for. After my amazing wife and kids. I joke that one day they're going to have to call my wife and say, 'Come get him,' because I have no reason to stop working until I can no longer remember lines or have some sort of physical limitation," McCook continues. Having said that, it's possible that Eric will start a new fashion house to compete with Forrester Creations. Eric, will you give Ridge some serious competition? Although Ridge may believe he is doing morally, Eric clearly does not want him to. There's a good chance that some designers will defect to join Eric's new endeavor. Will Eric eventually prove to Ridge that he hasn't created his best work, and provide him with some worthy competition? See what transpires by continuing to watch. It was one of those mornings at Forrester Creations where the energy in the building felt deceptively calm. The kind of calm that hides a storm beneath it. Ridge Forrester moved through the halls like a man who had accepted an unbearable responsibility, and refused to show cracks under the weight. Meanwhile, Eric Forrester, legend, founder, father, designer to generations, walked those same halls carrying disappointment like an invisible, heavy coat around his shoulders. There was a tension between them that lingered long before the confrontation even began, and everyone could feel it even if they pretended not to. When Eric approached Ridge that day, it wasn't with anger or defiance. It was with a quiet plea, a hope that maybe, just maybe, Ridge would hear him this time. He spoke calmly about wanting to return to the design team, insisting that he wasn't trying to take over, wasn't trying to push Ridge aside, but simply wanted to help lighten the load. He missed designing, missed the creative pulse that had kept him alive long before doctors and diagnoses complicated his life. But Ridge, firm and unwavering, shut that door almost immediately. He reminded Eric that his last line nearly killed him, literally. Ridge told him point-blank that he couldn't let him go through that again. It wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't an argument. It was a decision Ridge had made and wasn't going to rethink, no matter how Eric tried to reason with him. Ridge was in charge now, the one responsible for the future of the company, and in his mind protecting Eric meant keeping him off the design floor. And then suddenly, right in the middle of Eric trying to explain himself, Ridge's phone buzzed. A message. Something that apparently mattered more than finishing the conversation with the man who built everything around them. Ridge barely said a word. Just glanced at Eric with that mix of authority and emotional distance he'd mastered over the years, and walked away. Just walked away, leaving Eric standing there with unfinished thoughts and a heart that felt like it was slowly breaking apart. Eric watched Ridge disappear down the hallway, then looked around the office, really seeing it, the movement, the machinery, the endless cycle of creativity happening without him. He saw interns carrying sketches, designers fussing with fabric, staff members rushing past him as if he were a visitor instead of the man who started it all. And then those painful words echoed in his mind. Words he hadn't said out loud but felt deeply. Out with the old, in with the new. Stung. Cracked him open in a way few things ever had. He didn't want to leave Forrester Creations. He didn't want to fade away or be escorted into creative retirement as if he were some fragile relic. He still had ideas swirling in his head, lines waiting to be sketched, visions that kept him awake at night. His pencil wasn't done. His passion wasn't done. His legacy definitely wasn't done. But nobody, absolutely nobody, seemed willing to give him a say. Even Donna, as warm and supportive as she was, couldn't get through to Ridge. She told him over and over that Eric was a designer until his dying day, that taking away his creative purpose would hurt him more than any medical condition ever could. But nothing shifted. Ridge wasn't budging, and Eric felt the painful truth settling in. He was being pushed out of his own creation by the one person he never imagined would do it, his son. Later, when Eric made his way into the front office, he didn't move like the confident patriarch who once commanded every room. He looked around quietly, running his hand over the desk, over old sketches, old awards, old memories, as if he were saying goodbye. He started sorting through his things. Not panicking, not emotional, just quietly, thoughtfully. Like a man preparing for the inevitable. But there was something else behind his eyes too. A spark. A question. Maybe a plan. After all, John McCook himself had said in early 2024 that he'd work until someone physically dragged him away from the studio. He'd said he celebrated every single day he got to step into his role, that creativity was as much a part of his soul as breathing. And when he joked that one day someone would have to call his wife to come get him because he wasn't stopping until he absolutely couldn't, well, those words carried weight. Real weight. Because Eric Forrester wasn't the type to bow out gracefully when his heart still beat for designing. And maybe, just maybe, the writers were planting seeds, subtle seeds for something big. Something bold. Something new. So when Eric packed up his things, he wasn't just accepting defeat. He wasn't just surrendering to Ridge's authority. There was a glimmer in his expression that hinted he might be contemplating a far more dramatic next chapter. One that could flip the entire Forrester world upside down. What if Eric decided to start his own fashion house? What if he built something brand new? Something that carried his vision without restrictions or medical warnings or Ridge's overprotective leadership hovering above him? Could he attract designers to jump ship? Absolutely. Would he give Ridge real competition? Without question. After all, the fashion world thrives on reinvention, and there is nothing more powerful than a legend who feels underestimated, undervalued, and dismissed by his own family. Ridge might believe he's doing the right thing, believing it makes him sleep at night, but the truth is that this isn't what Eric wants. And when a man like Eric Forrester is pushed out, he doesn't shrink. He rises. So the real question hangs in the air like unfinished tension in the Forrester ducks. Will Eric Forrester finally show Ridge that he hasn't designed his last? Will he step out of the shadows Ridge pushed him into and emerge with something groundbreaking? Something that reminds everyone, including Ridge, exactly who he is and what he's still capable of. Because Eric hasn't taken his final bow. Not by a long shot. And if he chooses to fight back, Not with anger, but with fabric, vision, elegance, and the fire that made him a legend. Ridge may find himself standing across from his father not as a protector, but as a rival. And that would be the kind of storyline that no one in Los Angeles would see coming, but everyone would talk about. But the thing about moments like this is that they don't just live in one person's mind, they ripple. They move through the people closest to the situation, through the walls of the company, through the families connected by decades of triumphs and betrayals. Even people who weren't in the room could sense something had shifted. Donna felt it immediately. She knew Eric better than anyone at this point in his life. She could see the exhaustion behind his eyes, the disappointment pressing down on his shoulders, and the quiet resignation that he tried so hard to disguise with small familiar smiles. She knew he was hurting. Not physically, emotionally, and in a way that no medicine could treat. She approached him gently, like someone approaching a man who had been pushed to the edge of a cliff without knowing whether he would step back or finally let go. She tried to talk to him, to reassure him, to remind him that he was still the heart of Forrester Creations, whether Ridge realized it or not. But the words didn't land the same way they used to. Eric's silence was deeper. His sighs were heavier. His smile didn't reach his eyes. And for the first time in a long while, Donna felt a pang of fear. Not for his health, but for his spirit. Because Eric wasn't a man who quit. He wasn't someone who accepted being sidelined. Yet here he was, boxed into a corner in his own company, forced to accept decisions that didn't reflect who he was, or what he wanted. Ridge's refusal wasn't just a disagreement between father and son. It was a seismic shift. It was a reminder that time, authority, and legacy don't always align the way families hope they will. While Donna tried to soothe him, Eric wasn't listening the way he used to. Instead, he kept touching old sketches as if they were memories he wasn't ready to put away. Lines and curves that told stories. Designs that held pieces of his life. He lifted one sheet of paper, a rough concept he had drawn months ago, long before the medical scare, and traced the lines with his fingertips almost in a daze. His mind drifted to the very beginning, when he started Forrester Creations with nothing but a dream and a talent that refused to be ignored. He remembered the hunger, the raw ambition, the sense of purpose that burned through every sleepless night spent sketching patterns and experimenting with fabrics until his hands were numb. And now, decades later, that same fire flickered inside him. Not as strong as before, but still alive. Still calling. Still refusing to go out quietly. Meanwhile, Ridge walked down the hallway thinking he had done the right thing. He thought he was protecting his father, safeguarding his life after the close call they all went through. The medical crisis, the fear, the near loss. It still haunted Ridge every time he thought about it. He truly believed he was acting out of love. But Ridge has always had a dangerous flaw. He assumes he knows best. He assumes that because he feels righteous he is right. And so in his mind, shutting Eric out was a noble sacrifice, a difficult but necessary choice for the greater good. But what Ridge didn't understand, what he never understood, is that taking away a man's purpose can be more damaging than any illness. Ridge saw danger where Eric saw life. He saw risk where Eric saw identity. And in his mission to protect his father from physical harm, Ridge never acknowledged the emotional wound he was carving deeper and deeper into him. In that moment, Ridge wasn't the supportive son Eric needed. He was the new authority. A gatekeeper blocking Eric from the world he helped create. And as Ridge reached the elevator, unaware of the emotional storm brewing behind him, he didn't see the subtle shift in the air. The quiet brewing of something that would later shake the Forrester family to its core. Because Eric Forrester wasn't done. Not even close. A man like him doesn't fade out of a storyline. He evolves. He reinvents. He resurfaces stronger. And the quiet way he was packing his belongings wasn't a symbol of defeat. It was preparation. It was the beginning of something. Back in the front office, Donna noticed a slight change in Eric's posture. He no longer looked like a man ready to surrender. Instead, he looked like someone analyzing possibilities, assessing the weight of each item he picked up as if evaluating what to take with him into a new chapter. She heard him whisper something under his breath. Not loud enough to fully catch but unmistakably emotional. It was a mixture of frustration, longing, and determination. It sounded like a man promising himself that he would not be erased. Donna's instincts heightened. She knelt beside him, placing her hand gently over his. "Honey, what are you thinking?" she asked softly, trying not to let worry seep into her voice. Eric hesitated. He didn't want to scare her. He didn't want to say anything he wasn't sure about yet. But he also couldn't lie. Not to the woman who stood by his side through all the pain, the fear, the recovery, the uncertainty. "I'm thinking," he finally said with a quiet strength, "that maybe it's time I remind this world who I am." Donna's eyes widened slightly. "Eric." But he didn't elaborate. Instead, he stood up straighter, rolled his shoulders back, and looked around the office as if seeing it for the last time. He took one last glance at a framed photo of his family on the wall. So many memories. So much history. But history doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it traps you. Sometimes it blinds others to your present. And sometimes, just sometimes, it forces you to create a future you never expected. Meanwhile, across the building, whispers had already begun. Employees noticed Eric packing his things. They saw the discomfort on his face, the sadness in Donna's eyes. And whispers spread fast in a fashion house. Questions buzzed through the hallways. Is Eric leaving? Is Rich forcing him out? Is Forrester Creations changing hands again? Is this the beginning of the end? Some younger designers wondered aloud whether Ridge was becoming too controlling, too protective, too dominant in his leadership. Older employees, loyal to Eric for decades, felt unsettled. Some even felt betrayed on his behalf. And through all of this rising tension, Ridge remained oblivious to the emotional whirlwind his decision had created. If he had stopped long enough to look back, even for a second, he might have noticed the shift, the imbalance in the company's energy, the whispers growing louder, the undercurrent of unease threading through the building. But Ridge didn't look back. Not once. And that was the mistake that would haunt him later. Back with Eric, Donna continued to watch him carefully. His silence wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of reflection, of planning, of awakening. And then, after a long stretch of quiet, Eric spoke again. But this time, his words were sharp, clear, definitive. "I am not done designing," he said. Not to Donna, not to Ridge, not to anyone else. He said it to himself. A vow. A reclaiming. A reminder. His hands, slightly trembling at first, grew steadier as he pulled out a sketch pad. Donna watched, tears welling in her eyes, not from sadness but pride. Eric opened the sketchbook and turned to a blank page. For a moment his pencil hovered in the air, uncertain, almost hesitant. Then, with the slow, deliberate motion of a man touching the heartbeat of his soul, he began to draw. The lines were fluid, confident, alive. And Donna realized something important. Eric wasn't creating a farewell piece. He was creating a beginning, a rebirth, his resurgence. Then later that afternoon, after Eric left the building, Rich finally circled back to the front office. He expected to find his father sitting there waiting to argue again. Instead, he found an empty space. A desk missing personal items. Sketches gone. Favorite books gone. The air felt different, quieter, heavier, unsettling. Rich froze. For the first time since the confrontation, he felt a wave of doubt, a twinge of worry, a sliver of guilt. What had he actually done? What had he pushed his father into? What had he forced him to let go of? Ridge lowered himself into the chair across from Eric's desk, rubbing his forehead as flashes of their conversation looped through his mind. The look in Eric's eyes, the quiet sadness, the disappointment he tried so hard to hide. Ridge suddenly felt something he rarely allows himself to feel: fear. A deep, genuine fear that maybe he had crossed a line he couldn't undo. Maybe Eric wasn't just taking time away. Maybe he was gone. Really gone. And that thought hit Ridge harder than he expected. Because as much as Ridge wanted to protect him, he never once considered the emotional cost of his decision. Never considered that Eric might choose to walk away completely. Never considered that pushing someone for their own good can push them right out of your life. But it was too late. Eric had left. And he didn't leave quietly. He left with purpose. And that purpose, unknown to Ridge, was about to change everything. That night at home, Eric sat at his drafting table, the glow of a desk lamp illuminating fresh sketches spread out in front of him. Inspiration flowed through him like oxygen. He wasn't tired. He wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't weak. He felt alive. energized, reawakened. The house was quiet, but his mind wasn't. It was filled with ideas he'd held back for too long, visions he hadn't allowed himself to explore while trapped under other people's caution. He saw silhouettes, fabrics, colors, shapes, an entire brand forming in the corners of his imagination. And then, almost unconsciously, his pencil drifted to the top of the page and he wrote 2 words. Words he hadn't uttered in decades. Words that once symbolized the beginning of a legacy. Forrester Originals. Donna gasped softly when she saw the words. Eric didn't look up. He didn't stop sketching. He didn't hesitate. He was already gone into the world of creativity, into the fire of his passion, into the future he was ready to build, with or without Ridge's blessing. Meanwhile, back at Forrester Creations, Ridge continued pacing his office, restless, unsettled, uneasy. The building no longer felt steady beneath him. Something was off, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had set something in motion that might spiral far beyond his control. But Ridge wasn't ready to admit it, not yet. Not until the consequences hit him full force. And they would. Because when Eric Forrester rises, he rises with purpose, with legacy, with fire. And this time he isn't fighting for a company. He's fighting for his identity, his dignity, his future. And maybe, just maybe, he's fighting to show Ridge that he is still the man who built Forrester Creations brick by brick, and that he will not be pushed out again. Not by illness, not by time, not by fear, and definitely not by his own son. This was only the beginning. And when Eric finally steps back into the spotlight, the fashion world better be ready. Because legends don't retire. They return. And they return like a storm.